What's up, you guys? Welcome to Cashcraft Finesse, and if you haven't heard it yet, breaking news. We now have an official plan from Donald Trump that aims to lower the cost of housing. After all, affordability is at its lowest level in more than 3 decades. 76% of Americans feel like the cost of housing is a growing problem. Inventory is at a record low, and if there's a solution, now is the time to pay close attention, because it's crucial that we talk about exactly what's being proposed, what this means for you, the chances of this passing, and the likelihood of it making a sizable financial difference, especially since this could result in more than 4 million new homes potentially coming on the market. Although before we start, if you appreciate videos like this where we just talk about the facts, regardless of what side you're on, it would mean the world to me if you hit the like or subscribe if you haven't done that already. I know it sounds silly to ask for, but it actually does make a pretty big difference in the channel. And as a thank you for doing that, I'll do my best to read and reply to as many comments as I can. So thanks so much. And also a big thank you to Policy Genius for sponsoring this video, but more on that later. All right, so in terms of where we currently stand, here's a super brief recap to bring you up to speed. A lot of the problems that we see today are the result of the 2006 housing bubble, when home builders went into overdrive. Back then, they constructed more homes than buyers could purchase. People were purchasing properties with no money down, and once sellers began cashing out, everything suddenly collapsed. Now, typically, a market correction like this would be much needed because it's how a lot of people, including myself, were able to purchase their first property for a fraction of the price that it is today. But here's the catch. Even though the housing market eventually recovered, home construction never fully bounced back to pre-2006 levels. So with fewer homes being built and more people jumping in the markets, home prices started creeping back upwards until COVID hit. And everything went haywire. Like, as I'm sure you've seen throughout 2020 and 2021, mortgage rates hit their lowest point ever in history, making it incredibly easy to finance a home. This meant that a sizable portion of the housing market had been bought by people with really low interest rates who refused to move because if they did, their payment would increase by more than 50% now that rates have gone back up. This is what's known as the lock-in effect. And when you combine that with the fact that home building still has not caught up to where it was 20 years ago, you have the perfect storm to keep inventory low, prices high, and places like this renting for $1,400 a month. So what's the solution, and where do we go from here? Well, according to Trump's plan, there are 3 items that would bring down the cost of housing, with the first being building codes. As an example of this, the Department of Housing and Urban Development previously issued a policy that required all new construction meet a certain level of energy efficiencies if they were to qualify for federally backed mortgages. Now, even though this is certainly an upgrade, the National Association of Home Builders estimated that this could add up to $31,000 to the cost of a new home. And that's just the very beginning, because these energy efficiencies apply to pretty much everything from furnaces to water heaters to air conditioners, dishwashers, and light bulbs. The list goes on. Now, personally, I'll admit, I'm a fan of energy efficiency. I'm not a fan of wasting energy. I like to turn off electricity when I'm not using it. And I like renewable energy. But I'm also not naive to the fact that when certain things are mandated by the housing and urban development, that's going to drive up the cost. And if the only goal is to bring down the cost of a house to then pass the savings on to the buyer, this will make a bit of a difference. And that's what also brings me to my second point, less regulation. According to a prior executive order, Trump wrote that many Americans are unable to purchase homes due to historically high prices, in part due to regulatory requirements that alone account for 25% of the cost of constructing a new home. And according to several studies, he's not wrong. On single-family homes, government regulation accounts for 23.8% of the overall cost, and on multifamily, it's a whopping 40.6%. On top of that, it's said that even though many land use decisions are made by local governments, easing federal restrictions would help lower construction costs for home builders. However, critics of this argue that many of Trump's other policies, like tariffs, could actually end up having the exact opposite effect. Like, a lot of lumber comes from Canada, which could add a 25% increase to cost, and deportations could raise the cost of labor since, let's be honest, a lot of home builders use workers from out of the country. But either way, as it is right now, when builders look at their overhead cost, building affordable units just isn't profitable. And the only way that they can make money is by constructing luxury units. So if you could bring down the cost of overhead for builders, that should in theory make it more affordable for everyday buyers. Which then brings us to the third point of Trump's plan, building on federal land. See, what most people don't realize is that 28% of the entire United States is owned by the government. This includes things like national parks, areas with mineral rights, military bases, and locations preserved for conservation. So, as a way to help spark economic growth, the Trump administration is setting up a national task force to locate federal land that could potentially be used for affordable housing development. The goal is to open up large areas of federal land by transferring or leasing it to local governments. In terms of what this could look like, the American Enterprise Institute said that this could result in the construction of 3 to 4 million new homes across western states like Nevada, Utah, California, and Arizona. Although even though this looks pretty massive, when you really take a close look at this, you'll begin to realize that only a very small percentage of land is actually buildable. After all, most of this land is completely remote. It requires things like roads, electricity, and plumbing just to make it accessible. Not to mention, most of this land isn't located anywhere near a place that most people would want to live. Although the Wall Street Journal did take a closer look and found that 7.3% of all federal land would overlap with an existing city. So this could potentially be used for additional development. But in terms of whether or not this is actually going to make a difference and what you could expect in the housing market over the next few years, I hope you're sitting down. Although before we go into that, when it comes to investing, building wealth, or even basic personal finance, it is crucial to plan ahead and think long-term. Like, take the housing market as an example. History shows that the longer your time horizon, the greater the chances of coming out ahead profitable. And in my opinion, this mindset applies towards anything worth building. All right, now in terms of building on federal land, lowering the cost of housing, and the impact this is about to have on the housing market, here's what you came for. As far as Trump's use of federal land, it's really important to clarify that according to them, this isn't a free-for-all to build on federal lands, although we recognize that bad faith critics will likely call it that. It's a strategic effort to use our resources responsibly while preserving our most beautiful lands. They further went on to say that for land use, all options are being explored, including transferring or leasing federal lands to public housing authorities, nonprofit, and local government. However, lands within national parks, wildlife refuges, or other conservation areas will remain protected. Specifics will be announced as the task force completes its review and finalizes details. Practically, this just means that if an area is rezoned for development, it's probably just going to be near an existing city without an alternative purpose. And the government's likely going to rent it to the city on a land lease, so that way they retain some level of control and ownership. Although as far as where we stand right now in the housing market, if nothing changes, Zillow economists believe that U.S. home prices will rise just 0.8% between February 2025 and 26. Or basically, home prices are going to decline year over year when you account for inflation, which is the lowest level that they've given since 2020. In terms of why, they say that the rise in active listings is fueling softer price growth, as greater supply provides more options and more bargaining power for buyers. On top of that, potential buyers are opting to remain renters for longer as affordability challenges suppress demand for home purchases, with the weakest markets coming in around Louisiana and Texas. However, even though the market does appear to be mostly stuck, there is some good news with Trump's policies. All the economic uncertainty is causing mortgage rates to fall, making it more affordable for a buyer to purchase a home. That's right. As a result of cost-cutting, tariff concerns, and recession fears, mortgages are getting slightly more affordable, bringing a surplus of buyers and sellers back into the market, which inadvertently is helping the housing economy. Although, if you expect prices to fall according to the data, think again. Here's the thing. When it comes to affordability, we have two aspects to consider. The first is a home's selling price, and this is pretty straightforward. The more expensive the home, the higher the average payment, and the more unaffordable it becomes. But the second is where the real magic happens. Monthly payments. In this case, if you get a $500,000 loan at a 7% interest rate, your monthly payment's going to be $3,300 a month. But if interest rates are at 3.5%, the exact same loan would be $2,200 a month, even if home prices stay the exact same. And this is what we could expect to happen. As an example of this, with the exception of 2008, home prices have been shown to continue rising even during a recession 81% of the time. But interest rates usually end up going lower, meaning we could enter a situation where sales prices stay the exact same. But monthly payments go down because we enter a recession. Home prices don't budge, but monthly payments go down. Yes, I know that sounds confusing, but all you need to know is this. Lower interest rates allow people to take on a larger loan. But if a recession hits and fewer people are in the market, it's almost like a counterbalance, preventing prices from skyrocketing back into the stratosphere. Although in terms of what I think and my honest thoughts on Trump's housing plan, here you go. From my perspective, politics aside, if we want to tackle the housing problem, Here's what we're up against. According to the Realtor.com chief economist, the U.S. is facing a deficit between 2.5 million and 7.2 million homes. So right off the bat, home construction would have to increase by a lot to even begin to make a difference. And I'll be honest, federal regulation is only a very small piece of the pie. Like, even if building costs can come down 20% through eliminating things like energy efficiency, which would be very ambitious and unlikely to take place in the next year or two. Even if that did happen, home prices and monthly payments are still 50% higher than they were 5 years ago. So the end result is still home prices are very expensive. To dig a little deeper, Trump's latest executive order so far lacks any concrete details as to exactly where he's going to be cutting exact costs, other than citing regulatory requirements, which so far fall back on the state to ensure that developers aren't cutting corners. And even though opening up federal land is certainly interesting, only a small portion is located in an area that would actually make a difference. Shortage of land available as it is, and federal land throughout California is mainly hillside, and we all know how that turned out. Now, that's not to say that they can't properly build on federal land. It's just that it's going to be a lot less than people expect, and the underlying conditions still haven't changed. It's extremely expensive to build. People don't want to move, and things like regulation, zoning, and permits take a long time to get approved. In my opinion, the only way to unfreeze the housing market is to allow people to take their existing mortgage with them on a primary residence when they buy another property. From there, expedite the permits so people aren't waiting months for approval, and increase the capital gains exclusion from $500,000 to $1 million for married couples on, again, their primary residence to incentivize people to pick up and move. Honestly, if anyone from the administration is watching this, take my ideas, because all of these things I think are practical ways to unstick the housing market immediately. And if I could take my mortgage rate with me when I go and buy another house, I would consider moving, which says a lot because I absolutely love where I am. Anyway, all of that is to say that there's not much that I see significantly impacting the housing market over the next few years outside of a severe economic recession, which could actually be good for the housing market if interest rates fall. And all of these proposals are likely going to take 2 to 3 years to actually begin to make a difference. Like, you have to think, a lot of the major home builders plan their projects 1 to 2 years in advance. So once something actually passes, it's going to take at least that long to begin to show up in the market, assuming they actually pass those savings onto the buyer. That's why I think if you want an immediate incentive, it has to be to take your existing loan with you or a larger capital gains exclusion to incentivize people to sell. Yes, I understand this mainly benefits existing homeowners, but if the goal is to have more inventory come on the market as soon as possible, that would certainly do it. But then again, what do I know? I'm just a dude making videos in a half-converted garage, and I have no idea what I'm talking about. So let me know what you think down below in the comments section. I will do my best to read and reply to as many of them as I can. And if you're not already subscribed, feel free to hit the subscribe button. Like I said, it helps out tremendously. And if you've watched all the way through and you're not subscribed, it's free. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And until next time.